Hey everybody, welcome to class 12 of the spiritual disciplines. This one is about mourning, grasping your insignificance, fasting, and all assorted topics. I apologize. Apparently my handwriting's gotten even worse, as you can see by the wonderful slant. You can see my wife didn't do it this time. But before I get started, I just want to say, thank you all of you who are part of this class that have been listening. Thank you for all of those who provide feedback. I really appreciate it. Please provide more. I love it when feedback is provided. It really helps me with future classes, and it helps me really track with my thinking. I don't always get to test these ideas out with other people, so it's great to have some dialogue and to sharpen ourselves when we can. One further thanks to Cole and Shayna. They're amazing. They do way more work than you guys probably even know. And so I wanted to thank them. They're the ones who put together, the intro video and the exit video. They're the ones who helped me with the uploading and put it on the podcast. And they do a tremendous amount of work for the church. So thank you, Cole and Shayna. I really appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's go and start with this idea, this question that people grapple with all the time. It's a question of significance. How significant are you? Like, do you matter? Do you have significance? Do you have value? I'd like to say that this is an easy to answer question, but it's something that people struggle with all the time. All the time. I would say it's one of the biggest reasons why people go to counseling. I would say it's one of those things that's sort of hidden underneath a lot of relationship dynamics and a lot of pursuits out in the world. You'll find people who would rather die or work themselves to death in a job rather than lose a job and then have to ask this question of how significant am I? Like, of what value am I? People run from questions like these. They really do. The Bible's got a few things to say, and it's kind of difficult to wade through, but let's try it. Let's try to get through this. One of the things that the Bible says in the very beginning is that we are made in His image. We are patterned after God. God is the perfect, the complete, the ultimate, and we are reflections of that. We are creations of Him who created us. And when it says image, it's something like image bearers, meaning that we, as His representatives on the earth, we are ruling in His place. We are representations of His rule. We image Him to some degree, right? It says in Psalm 139 that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We aren't accidents. We aren't intentional. This isn't something that when He creates us, we weren't a mistake. That there's intentionality behind us. That there's beauty even in our imperfections and our flaws. It says we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Bible also says, and this is my favorite, so I'll go ahead and quote it word for word, that in 1 John 3 it says, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God." And that is what we are. I love John. I love his childlike language. See what love God has lavished on us. We are children of God. That's what we are. We are children. We are birthed from the divine. And all of this seems to point to the idea that we're significant. We're of inestimable worth. We have an eternity to look forward to. We are not just beings that come and go. But at the same time, the Bible will say things like, well, all people are like grass. They wither and they fail. They are here today and gone tomorrow. And this is in 1 Peter, and also it's in Psalms 103. Right? It's the idea that we're not permanent. We're just here today for just a moment in time. We're like chaff. We're like grass. We're like, I don't know. We don't have any real permanence here on this world. Ecclesiastes, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. Ecclesiastes 1 starts with this idea of meaningless. What do people gain from their labors? What do they get from their toils? They work hard and they sweat, and then the things that they are created fall to nothing. Once again, this is the idea of entropy. It's like, what are we working for? The things that we make will eventually be destroyed. Even this house that I'm recording in and everything that I own will eventually find their way to a dumpster, to a landfill, or be swallowed up by the earth, or tackled by the weeds in the ground. Everything that I see around me is eventually going to amount to nothing and be turned to dust, just like this physical body of mine, right? And what's the point? What's the meaning? Once again, in Job, this is chapter 38. This is towards the end where Job and his three friends have been talking about his plight and asking all kinds of philosophical questions. And God finally starts in these 2 chapters. He asks a total of 77 questions to Job. And the first one was, where are you when I laid the earth's foundations? Right? Where were you when I created all of this? And the answer, the question, of course, is rhetorical, because the answer is, you weren't. You weren't anywhere. Right? And God's asking this question to Job, even in his pain, I think to illustrate how insignificant Job is compared to all that's around him. Right? This idea of insignificance is definitely in the Bible. This idea of impermanence, like we are here today and we are gone tomorrow. We need to be humble about this. And so these 2 ideas of significance and insignificance create an apparent tension within us. Right? I think we feel it. We feel it in our bones, this tension between this idea of just being very valuable, but also just being very discardable. Right? And I'd say a few things in order to harmonize this and to make sense of this, because I think the Bible is just very clear, but you kind of have to read the whole thing. And I mean it. And I've read the whole thing at least once. But man, like this is a deep enough concept to where I'm sure many of you can even help clear it up, because it's a hard one to understand. But here's what I have. Here's what I've come up with so far in my 39 years of life. One of the best things one of the best places to find is in 2 Corinthians, chapter 4, verse 7. And this is the idea that your significance comes from God. In that scripture, it talks about us being jars of clay, like treasure hidden in jars of clay, which I think is a really accurate depiction of what it means to be a human. Right? We are treasure, meaning we are significant, and the thing that houses us is insignificant, our jars of clay, right? That is the perishable that contains the imperishable, if you will, right? It's pretty clear that we were designed for worship, and that this thing that you see and everything else that you see is perishable. Somehow there's this tension between us, our essential being, the soul, if you will, the divinely created personage that is housed within this body. Somehow this thing is worthwhile, even though this flesh will eventually dissipate and wither and die, and then be turned to dust, as is often said on Ash Wednesday. From dust you came, and to dust you will return. Right? It even says in the book of Genesis, it talks about us as living beings. It's sort of like the idea of dust being breathed into. And the dust by itself isn't worth anything, but the breath is. Right? This is the idea of like our worth comes from God. He is the one who determines our worth. We don't determine our own worth. Right? Our significance comes from God. 2 Corinthians 4:16, it also says that we're outwardly wasting away, but we're internally renewed day by day. And I'll contrast that to, say, evolution, or anybody who has just a purely evolutionary mindset, especially the macroevolution, meaning that everything can be explained through random mutagenesis, all the way down from the bacteria in the Big Bang, all the way to who we are as human beings right now, descended from apes and all that stuff. You know, I guess there's some evidence that some of this could be true, at least on the micro sense. But man, if you were to fully and truly believe this, it means that everything's just random. There's no purpose to this. There's no purpose to really anything. We are just products of of random chance and molecules kind of like just bumping into each other. Right? And how are we supposed to gain any sort of significance from that? I think this is why atheism is so cold and so detached. You find people who are atheists, and they're often very, very calculating, intelligent people, but who also have a little coldness to them, a little somewhat intellectual, maybe so they don't have to grasp and feel their insignificance. Right? I would say, and I think this is definitely true, that love in essence demands sacrifice, and that sacrifice is what determines worth. Let me explain. This is even an economics thing. Interesting thing about economics, it's the study of supply and demand, and basically, and we know this, things are worth what you will pay for them, and that's a very good, say, truism. Right, my phone, this house, this wedding ring, my haircut, all of those things are worth what I and millions of people will pay for them, averaged across time. That's how we determine the price of everything. That's really basic economics. But it works in other ways as well. It works in, say, it works in marriage. One of the ways that you can find out if I love my wife or she loves me back is how much she's willing to sacrifice, or how much I'm willing to sacrifice. And sacrifice doesn't mean that I'm, just bleeding all over and, chopping off my arm, anything grotesque like that. It just means how much am I worth to spend today in expectation of something tomorrow. That's what it means. Right? How much am I willing to put forth the effort to take her on a date and talk with her and spend time with her and buy her nice things that she wants and do some planning and make compromises. How much am I willing to do that? That in essence tells me and tells the whole world how much she's worth to me. And you don't have to believe the words that come out of people's mouths. Just watch how they live their life. That is more of a clear indication of how much something is worth. Because it's pretty easy to say, I love you forever, you're the best thing in my life. Okay, that cost me about 3 seconds and a few words, right? How much did that really cost me to say? But to live that out, it's a big deal. Same thing with kids. A lot of people, I think, struggle with the concept of significance, or just feeling this idea of self-worth, because their parents treated them as more of an inconvenience. They treated them as creatures that are not worth that much, or just getting in the way. Right? And the problem with that with kids is that they believe it. And they struggle with believing that they're worthless, frankly, for the rest of their life, or until they struggle through it and gain a greater, more intrinsic sense of worth. And they can say to their parents even that I'm worth something even if you didn't think so. Right? Sometimes it even takes having our own children to come to that. Because when you have children, they don't earn anything. They're floppy and helpless, and they don't provide any kind of value, but at the same time we would say they are of infinite worth. And you intrinsically know that when you have a child or when you hold a child. And if that's the case for a baby, why isn't that the case for us? That's a good question to ask, right? Why isn't it the case for us? You can say that about a baby, why can't you say that about yourself? And when did you lose that? Right? Last thing I'll say is about worship. We're told to seek ye first the kingdom of God. We're told to put God first. Because when we put God first, everything else is in line. And when we put ourselves first, when we become our own reference point for worth, I think you'll find that that's either really narcissistic or it's very self-defeating. Right? Just go ahead and try it. Go look in the mirror and tell yourself you're just worthless. Or go and look at the mirror and tell yourself that you're of greatest value. Right? And you're the best thing that ever happened to mankind. Right? Go try looking in the mirror, saying those words, and then trying to believe it. And see how it feels. Right? I believe, in general, that our significance, our self-worth, comes from secure attachments, meaning reciprocal, loving relationships with people, where we get eye contact and we get people who hear us, because this is intrinsic value right here. When I look at you and when I hear you, when I'm spending time being in your presence, right? Intrinsically, I don't even have to say it, but that means you exist and you're valuable enough for at least for me to do that, right? I would say we're fooling ourselves if we think we can feel significant and we're sitting there on a desert island. Our significance, very appropriately, is in relationship to others as well as in our relationship to God. That's often where we find our value or our usefulness, and our progress towards the ideal self. Right? You are going to feel like you have some significance. There's something to you. There's some worth when you are aiming towards your ideal self. You're becoming whoever it is, the best that you can be. And I put the word Jesus on there because Jesus is our model of what that looks like. Right? If you have secure attachments, if you have good relationships with people who love you and you love them, and you're aiming at this ideal version of yourself, the person that God created you to be and is encouraging you to become, I believe that you will feel significant. And I think you'll feel significant because you're honoring what's already there. You're honoring the divine purpose within you, and you're honoring the divine people that are around you, the children of God, to love and serve. I'll add one last thing, is I think self-worship is demonic. And you can tell because watch people who say, I'm the greatest, I'm the best, no one's better than me. Right? You can say it kind of in a hyperbolic fashion, and maybe there's just a little bit of moxie involved. But watch people who really live that way. Because what ends up happening is they have this belief about superiority, and then they take that belief of superiority and they can use it as an excuse or as a reason to violate other people and put them down, right? Because I'm the best of humanity. If I'm the best that this world has to offer, what makes me think I can't just do anything I want to you to prove that, right? That's why it's demonic. It's demonic because I have to find some way to believe that. Maybe I can just, in my head, believe it. But most people, when they believe this way, how they act is superior, entitled, and oftentimes abusive. And I can say that confidently because I've seen it. I've seen it in a lot of the people that I've worked with, right? Let's move on towards another fun topic, mourning. Let's go ahead and read Ecclesiastes 7. Ecclesiastes 7 starts with, it says, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. Ooh. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of every man, and the living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of pleasure. You know, you got to give it to Solomon to really prop us up and really make us feel good, right? You don't usually hear words like this, and if you do, it's usually by a Debbie Downer or somebody who's very depressed. But you got to wonder, where do these words come from? It's better to go to a house of mourning than a house of praise. Sorrow is better than laughter. This is wisdom from an old, frail man. This is wisdom from somebody who's lived life, tried it all, and in the end is saying things like, meaningless, it's all meaningless, I don't get it. You know, I'm about to die, and what have I accomplished, and who's going to remember me, and who even cares? You know, everything that I create is about to die. And you know what? He's actually right. You know, how many of the people do we really remember from, say, 100 years ago or 200 years ago? Not even 3,000-4,000 or however many it is. How many people 100 years ago, 200 years ago? Sure, we have names written down. We have history books, right? But who actually knows these people? Right? And the only people who are remembered are the ones who do really great things or really horrible things. Right? Ordinary guys like me, no one's going to remember me. Maybe my grandchildren will remember me. Maybe my great-grandchildren. But even that, they'll know the old me. The me that's much more frail, much less capable. And this is the lot. This is where everybody's going. This is where everybody's going. And the older you get, I think the more you feel it. Stuff stops working. Stuff stops being all that purposeful and meaningful and happy. You'd never hear a young person saying it, and if they ever said it, you'd know that something seriously went on. But let's learn from Solomon. Because when he talks about mourning, I think he talks about going through life and going into old age especially with our eyes open, knowing that death awaits us all and that mortality is reality. And he says this, death is the destination of us all. We all hope that we live an awful long time, sure. And that we live until our end, and then our end would be a painless end. Right? That would be perfect, but I think we all know it's not how life works sometimes. Right? I like this phrase. It's kind of echoed by Ecclesiastes. It makes you wonder if Shakespeare read Ecclesiastes. He says, "The way to dusty death, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." So, and that's written just like with Solomon. That's written after he lost his wife, and his career was getting challenged. He was on his downfall. And it's mourning. What are you supposed to do? Shake your fist at God? This is the end of all of us. All of us are going to experience loss. And we shouldn't expect anything different. Life is a story that you co-write with God. I think it's one of the reasons why we talk about the fall. We talk about the fallen nature of the world. Why we talk about Israel, meaning wrestling with God. Life is a struggle. It's supposed to be a struggle. It's not supposed to be happy and easy. And actually, we find so much meaning in the struggle. It's part of the struggle that changes us. It's part of the struggle that makes us who we are. And we shouldn't try to avoid that. And once again, mourning isn't a bad thing. It is an inevitable thing. And if you don't mourn, what you're going to do is you're going to live in some version of a delusion. Reality is what it is. And there's very little we can do to change. If we can, great. Let's do it. Right? If we can, let's do it. But if we can't, we need to mourn. We need to grieve. And that just means we accept a reality that we did not choose, that we did not create, but nevertheless is here. And the more that we accept it, the more we're free of fighting it. Right? Life is not about, and I think this is what Solomon's talking about, life is not about all the ecstatic little moments and the next big thing and the, going on this trip and going on that trip and got this cool little, app on my phone. Those are nice. Those are nice little exciting things. It can be fairly meaningful. But life is often, and probably more often, about accepting the reality that we live in and learning to wrestle with God and learning to mourn and grieve with one another about what it's like. We are supposed to embrace the fallen nature of this world. We got kicked out of the garden. That is something that happened. That's at the very beginning of the book, and it isn't until the very end of the book where God says that He will wipe away all tears. Back over in Revelation 21. Right? And I don't say this to be a downer. I say this because when this is our mindset, then when bad things happen, we're like, of course bad things happen. Because we live in this world. Right? Because we have this body. Because we have this nature that we grapple with. We even grapple with ourselves. Right? Let's not be surprised when bad things happen. Bad things happen all the time. Bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. We know that the Lord sends rain and sunshine on both the good and the bad. And He doesn't do this out of a rewarding sense. He does it because he's merciful. He wants as many as possible to come to know him. And so he isn't just going to smite people dead as soon as they mess up. And frankly, I mean, if God smote you when you messed up time and time again, you wouldn't be here, and neither would I. Right? Right. Let's meditate on death and redemption. And what I mean is that we need to grasp our mortality. We need to grasp it. We need to understand that life is not guaranteed. And we should meditate that. That shouldn't be something that we think about all the time, but man, we should acknowledge it. It should give us a sense of peace, and I think it should give us a sense of focus and of urgency. Watch people who have been through a lot of pain. Watch them. They tend to be very disciplined people. And they're disciplined because they don't avoid things, because they know what pain looks like, and they know how important every single moment is. You know, watch people who have been given second chances. Watch sober addicts. Watch people who went through a bunch of stuff and then came to know Christ. And chances are they're more likely to be more motivated than you and I, even. Because they know how precious life is. They know how important every moment is. And they don't just think it, they feel it, and they act it out. And I think part of how they get there is they do. They meditate on death and redemption. Right? Parallel the Bridegroom, I think, illustrates this very closely about this idea of, the invitation's there, but only the people who are ready are going to be able to take advantage of that. Right? It's kind of scary, but it's a reminder to us that every moment is precious, and we should be prepared. And here's a question for you. It's not a great question. It's not a fun question, but what would happen? What would happen if your story ended today? Like if somebody told your life story and it ended today, would it seem like there's a sense of closure, a sense of purpose? Would it seem like everything fit? Would people be at your funeral? Would they celebrate your legacy? How would that story go? Right? Certainly we know of people who are cut way too short, but it seems like even the teenagers or the people in their 20s that seem to perish, if they've lived a great life, we can celebrate that. And if they were just messing around and just seemed to take life as an unimportant, valueless kind of thing, I don't think we celebrate that much. We kind of mourn that. We say like, gosh, it should have been so much more. So much wasted potential. Because we see the divine spark in that person, and that divine spark was not realized. It did not create enough. And so there's sadness with that. And I would say this, I hope this isn't too controversial of a thing, because it is in the Bible. Right? But you're not a good person. Right? I kind of chuckle every time I hear somebody to say, oh, they're making me out to be a bad person. Well, you are. Right? I don't go around telling people this, that they're bad people, because they don't always understand the nuances of this. But you're not a good person. Jesus even says so in Mark 10, verse 18. When they say to him, good teacher, he says, no one is good but God. Right? And in principle, Jesus is the only one who should have been able to claim goodness. And he doesn't. What does that tell you about us? What does that tell you about us? We're not supposed to be good. We don't achieve this thing called good, which is kind of like a perfection, not just a momentary thing. We are both good and we're bad, and we wrestle with both of those natures internally until we die. Right? We're more complicated than just good and just bad. By the way, this is why you're not supposed to judge people. It's because you're judging them by one dimension and not their full character. Right? You're taking out one little thing that you don't like, and you're saying that this defines the entirety of you. Right? Not good. Not good. We know from Romans 3 that all have fallen short of the glory of God. We know that. Right? So I'd ask us, I know this is kind of like maybe this is a heavier topic. I don't know. I'm used to talking about these things. But I hope you know that by mourning, by grasping your insignificance and your significance, you'll find that your life is more peaceful, more calm, and your expectations are maybe a little bit lower, so that when bad things happen, it does not create such an emotional rush of just shame and anger. But when bad things happen, you'll be able to say, of course. Of course. And maybe you'll be able to say to yourself, maybe it's supposed to be this bad. Maybe it's supposed to be this bad. Right? I'd ask you, here's some spiritual practices to think about, consider, and perhaps do. I didn't write this down, but visiting a cemetery, go and visiting the loved ones and remembering them and honoring them can be very meaningful. Can give so much purpose and meaning to life. Mourning, I think, is great. Just the practice of mourning, and you'll know when to do it because you'll feel yourself starting to fight something negative or blaming God, or you'll find yourself being outraged by the negative things that happen in this world. And yes, negative things happen. But mourning says, gives a sigh, and it says, of course, bad things are going to happen. Right? He gives and he takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. We mourn because we shouldn't expect that good things are going to happen to good people and good things are going to happen all the time to us. Right? Last thing is about fasting. It's not something that's very popular in our day and age, but it seemed like it's an expectation back in Jesus' time. Fasting, it's actually a really interesting practice. I've done it a few times throughout my life, usually in moments of where I needed to discern or make a hard decision. And I'll say that fasting really helps people focus. They really do. If you fast for even just a day or two, your stomach will grumble, right? You'll start to feel weak. The body will actually go through some physical changes, and it can actually be healthy. And I'm not talking about fasting for, weight-related matters. I'm talking about fasting as a religious experience. And the reason why you fast is because you're experiencing how frail you are. And maybe you don't know this, but when you don't eat for about 2 days and only drink water, you start to feel a bit weak. And you might start to notice that feeling and find a little sadness, a little heaviness set upon you. You might notice that you are more focused, that you get a little sentimental. You might notice that your prayers have more urgency and weight to them. A lot of people experience a lot of different things in fasting. But I would ask you, if you've never fasted, and especially if you have something big going on, a big decision you need to make, try fasting. It's pretty easy. Just don't eat for 1 day or two. Keep drinking water, but just don't eat. I'm sure there's a lot of things on the internet. You can certainly have a loved one monitor your fasting if you're worried about health problems. But give it a shot. It's kind of like self-control. It's kind of like training wheels for self-control, right? You're creating a situation where you're having to exercise some discipline that you're creating, and that's not being focused on you. Give it a shot and let me know what it's like in the comments if you ever do try it. So I'll say it's been an honor and a pleasure teaching this course. I hope I get to teach a course in person sometime in the future. But until then, love you guys and God bless. Hope this has been a blessing to you. Take care.